She was just a 16-year-old girl flying home. Then the flight attendant called the police. She only asked for a glass of water. What she got was handcuffs. 16-year-old Amara Jennings had every right to be in that first-class seat. She wasn't loud. She wasn't unruly. She was simply present. A quiet black teenager returning from a robotics conference, carrying nothing more than a sketch pad and the calm strength her mother taught her. So why did the flight attendant see her as a threat? Why did a white officer drag her bleeding down the aisle while dozens of passengers watched? And why didn't anyone stop it? But here's what nobody knew. Amara's father, Darius Jennings, was the CEO of the very airline they humiliated her on. And when he arrives, everything changes. This isn't just a story about a flight gone wrong. It's about legacy, justice, and what happens when one girl dares to rise with dignity in the face of public shame. What would you do if the world mistook your silence for guilt? Don't miss this powerful journey. Like, share, and subscribe to our channel. And now, let's begin the story of Amara Jennings. Blood had a way of silencing a room. It wasn't the shouting. It wasn't the metallic click of the cuffs or the stunned gasp from seat 4C. It was the sight of a thin, dark ribbon of blood trailing from a girl's temple, slowly tracing the edge of her cheek, dripping onto the pristine leather of a first-class seat. And the silence that followed was almost louder than the noise. Amara Jennings sat still, lips pressed tightly together, her breathing shallow and steady. Her wrists were cuffed behind her, awkwardly pinned between the narrow seat and the metal armrest. Her suitcase lay open on the carpeted aisle, a worn hardcover book, a half-eaten protein bar, and her polished ID badge had fallen out. The badge read, Amara Jennings, National Young Aviators Program. No one moved to pick it up. The officer who had cuffed her, Cole Branson, stood over her like a statue, his face unreadable but his knuckles still white from tension. Around them, passengers looked on. Some raised phones hesitantly, pretending not to record. Others turned away, eyes flickering between pity and discomfort. The flight attendant, Deborah Whitlow, hovered near the galley, arms crossed over her neatly pressed uniform, jaw clenched. She looked uncomfortable now, like maybe this had gone further than she meant it to, or maybe she just hated that things had become visible. Captain Jonah Marks stepped out of the cockpit slowly, his face tight with concern. His voice, when he spoke, was quiet but firm. What happened here? No one answered at first, and then came the footsteps, heavy, steady, determined. They echoed up the jet bridge like a slow drumbeat, calm, measured, dangerous in their control. Darius Jennings stepped onto the plane without a word. He wore no badge, no uniform, no tie, just a simple navy blue sweater, dark slacks, and a wedding band he no longer wore on his left hand. But the moment his eyes fell on the girl in seat 3A on the red smear above her eye, the zip ties around her wrists, the cracked phone on the floor, every flight attendant froze, because they knew him. Darius Jennings, CEO of Orion Air, and the girl in the seat, cuffed and bleeding quietly, was his daughter. Amara didn't cry, not once. She simply looked up at him, dark eyes wide and holding something deeper than fear. Disappointment, confusion, maybe even shame. She didn't say anything. She didn't need to. Darius looked at Officer Branson first. "You can remove those cuffs," he said, his voice almost too calm. Branson blinked. "Sir, she's a minor. She's bleeding. She's in my custody. Remove them." Branson hesitated for half a second too long. Darius stepped closer. "I said now." Branson reached for the cuffs with a slight tremble in his fingers. He hadn't made the connection. The officer had no idea the girl he was manhandling was the daughter of the man who signed half the regional law enforcement aviation contracts in this state. As the zip ties came loose, Amara exhaled softly. Her hands dropped into her lap, marked red with pressure lines. Darius knelt beside her, pulled out a handkerchief from his pocket, and gently dabbed at the blood on her face. "Did they hit you?" "No," she whispered. "I hit my head when he grabbed me." He didn't ask anything more. Instead, he stood and turned toward Deborah Whitlow. His eyes didn't leave hers. "Get the captain." "He's all ready." "I said get him again." The second time, the tone was colder. Captain Mark stepped forward, already halfway to them. "Mr. Jennings, this isn't what it looks like." There was a misunderstanding. A complaint. Darius raised a hand. "Save it for the boardroom." There was no shouting, no threats, just that voice, measured. Steel beneath silk. The air inside the cabin had shifted. Everyone could feel it. Passengers began murmuring. A woman in row 5 wiped a tear. A young man in 2D stared at Amara like he was seeing something too large for words. Ms. Gloria Mayfield, seated behind Amara, placed a gentle hand on the girl's shoulder. "This child did nothing wrong," she said clearly. "To no one and everyone. I saw it all." Darius turned to her. "Thank you," he said softly. He took out his phone and dialed. "Yasmin," he said, speaking to the head of customer experience. "I need a full incident report on Flight 203 from Atlanta to Denver." "Yes. Now. Pull body cam footage, cabin surveillance, passenger complaints, and suspend both Branson and Whitlow pending investigation." He paused. "And bring me the diversity audit I asked for 6 months ago. No more delays." He hung up. Then he turned back to his daughter and held out a hand. "Come on. You're flying home with me." Amara rose slowly, her legs shaky but her back still straight. She held onto his arm as they walked past rows of stunned passengers. Some nodded. A few clapped quietly. One older gentleman whispered, "God bless you, sir." They said nothing as they stepped off the plane, but the silence behind them said everything. Because in just 10 minutes, a quiet teenage girl had gone from criminal to catalyst. And no one, especially not Deborah Whitlow, had seen it coming. Amara Jennings had always loved airports. There was something about them that felt like possibility stretched thin across glass and concrete. The sound of rolling suitcases, the way the fluorescent lights hummed softly overhead, the smell of cinnamon pretzels and jet fuel in the air. Even as a child, she'd felt at home between terminals. She didn't tell many people. But her favorite place in the world was Gate A24 at Raleigh-Jordan International. That gate faced west, and in the late afternoon, the sun spilled through the floor-to-ceiling windows, washing the waiting area in gold. It was the first gate she'd ever flown out of, the first one her dad had ever picked her up from, and the one she always returned to. Now, sitting in the back seat of the town car her father had arranged. Amara stared out the tinted window as the city receded behind them. Her temple ached faintly. A butterfly-shaped bruise was already forming along her right cheekbone. She touched it lightly, winced, and let her hand fall back into her lap. She didn't cry. That was the rule. Not in front of people. Not if she could help it. "Amara," her father said from the front passenger seat, not looking back. "Are you sure you don't want to go to urgent care?" She shook her head once. "No concussion, no dizziness, just embarrassed." Darius looked at her through the rearview mirror. His eyes were tired but focused. He knew better than to push. They rode in silence a few more minutes. Then Amara spoke again, voice low. Why didn't she believe me Darius didn't answer right away? Because some people don't see a girl. They see a threat. Amara blinked. Her eyes stung. but she didn't let it show. I had my boarding pass. I had my ID. I did everything right. I know. I smiled at her. I didn't argue. I said, "Ma'am, I know." Amara clenched her hands in her lap. She hated how quiet her father was. It wasn't coldness. It was calculation. She knew him well enough to recognize when he was pulling back, thinking 4 steps ahead. "You're mad," she said. "Yes." He answered, "But not at you." He finally turned toward her, his voice gentler now. "You shouldn't have to perform for basic decency. You shouldn't have to soften yourself so the world feels less afraid of you." Her throat tightened. She looked away. The car pulled into the private terminal entrance of Orion Air's executive hangar. The driver stepped out without a word, opening the door for them. Amara adjusted the strap of her backpack and stepped out into the early evening air. This wasn't how today was supposed to go. She had been so proud that morning. Her first solo flight in first class. She was heading to the Young Aviators Summit in Denver, one of 10 students in the country selected to attend. She had written the essay by herself, stayed up until 2 a.m. drafting and redrafting it, afraid to ask her dad for help because she wanted it to be hers. All hers. And when the acceptance email came, she didn't scream. She just stared at the screen for a long time, her hand over her heart, while tears slowly welled in her eyes. She remembered what she wore that day, a navy blazer, soft jeans, and her Orion Air Wings pin. The same one her father had given her at age 7 when she told him she wanted to build planes that didn't treat people like they were disposable. That dream felt further away now, inside the terminal. The silence was heavier. Staff members averted their eyes. The head of ground operations approached but stopped short when Darius held up his hand. "Not now." Amara followed her father through the hallway that led to his private office. She'd been here before. It always smelled like cedar wood and clean paper. The walls were lined with aviation books, framed photographs of prototype aircrafts, and a single black and white portrait of a much younger Darius standing beside a Cessna 172 smiling and covered in engine grease. He closed the door behind them and finally exhaled. A long, controlled release. Amara stood in the center of the room. "You want me to talk to the press?" she asked, her voice flat. "You want to spin this into a learning moment?" Darius sat on the edge of his desk, arms crossed. He didn't speak for a moment. "No," he said. "I want to know how you're feeling. But if you want to talk about what happened, I'm listening." Amara walked slowly to the large window. The sunset was beautiful, pink clouds stretching thin across a pale sky, planes taking off in the distance, weightless and free. "I feel stupid," she whispered. "You are not stupid. I let her do it. I let her take my ticket and check it twice. I let her say my seat was probably a mistake. I even stood when she told me to. I didn't want to cause a scene. I didn't want to be angry." Her voice cracked slightly. "I did everything they tell girls like me to do. And it didn't matter." Darius stepped closer but didn't reach for her. He knew she needed space. "She saw you as a risk because of who you are," he said, and the system gave her the power to act on that. Amara's shoulders slumped. "Then what's the point?" He paused. "The point," he said slowly, "is that they didn't expect you to get back up." She turned toward him. "You think I should sue? I think you should speak. When you're ready. In your own words. Not for the press. Not for my board. For yourself. So they don't get the last word." Amara stared at him, for the first time all day. Her expression softened. "What if I'm still angry?" He nodded. "Good. That means you're still fighting." They stood in silence for a while, Then Amara walked to the small bookshelf near the door. She picked up an old leather-bound notebook, flipped through a few pages, and tore one out. It was a sketch she had drawn of a modular seating system for airplanes that adjusted dynamically for comfort and safety. Her dream design. She looked at it for a long time. Then she folded it carefully, slid it into her backpack, and whispered, "I still want to fly." The day had started with such promise. Amara Jennings had chosen her seat with care. 3A, window side. She liked to watch the mechanics during taxi, the subtle shifts and flap angles, the shimmering heat ripple from the engines. There was something steadying about seeing everything work exactly as it was designed to. As she rolled her carry-on through the jet bridge, her boarding pass in hand, she felt it again, that quiet flutter of pride in her chest. Not nerves, anticipation. She was ready. The flight attendant stood just at the door, clipboard in one hand, tight smile on her face. Her blonde hair was pinned neatly behind her ears. Her posture was perfect. She looked like she had been carved from ice and practiced into perfection. "Good morning," Amara said politely. Handing over her pass, the woman took it, her smile faltering just slightly as she looked from the paper to Amara's face, then back again. "You're in first class." The question wasn't unkind, not exactly. It was just shaped like suspicion wrapped in politeness. "Yes, ma'am. 3A." The woman looked again, then stepped aside. "Of course. Welcome aboard." Amara stepped past her, wheeling her bag carefully down the carpeted aisle. The first-class cabin was already filling. A man in 1D was arguing on the phone in a loud voice. A young couple laughed softly across from one another in 2A and 2B. It smelled faintly of citrus and fresh upholstery. Her seat was waiting. She placed her backpack gently under the seat, slipped into 3A, and clicked her seat belt across her waist. She was just pulling out her paperback, an annotated biography of Bessie Coleman, when the same flight attendant reappeared. "Hi again," she said, still smiling. But this time it was even tighter, like it had to be forced. "Sorry to bother you. Could I just see your boarding pass again real quick?" Amara blinked. "I already gave it to you." "I know. Just a quick confirmation." Amara reached into the side pocket of her backpack and retrieved it. The woman studied it like it was written in another language. "Okay. Great. Thank you." Amara tried to return to her book. The woman hovered a second longer. "Did someone purchase this seat for you, or did you upgrade yourself at the counter?" Amara looked up slowly. "I was assigned this seat when I booked my ticket. It's part of my sponsorship for the Young Aviators Summit." The woman nodded quickly, but her eyes didn't warm. They narrowed, slightly. "Of course. That's great. Very impressive." She left after that. Amara exhaled quietly. The page in front of her was still unread. Across the aisle, the man in 3C glanced at her. He was older, maybe 50, with salt and pepper hair and sharp gray eyes. He looked like someone used to power and lunch reservations. He smiled at her, but it didn't reach his eyes either. She turned her attention back to the window. From this angle, she could see the top of the control tower. It made her think of her father again, of how he used to drive her out to the airfield on Saturdays when she was little, just to watch planes land. He'd sit her on his shoulders and name every model that flew past. Boeing 737, Embraer 175, Gulfstream G650. He taught her to tell the difference by the winglets. Back then, the world had felt open. Now it felt like something was pressing against her skin. The flight attendant, her name tag said Deborah returned 20 minutes later with the tray of drinks. Sparkling water, orange juice, mimosa. When she reached Amara, she paused. "I'll have water, please," Amara said politely. Deborah hesitated, then handed her a cup with a napkin, but said nothing. Amara tried not to notice how she offered full sentences to everyone else. She tried not to notice the way Deborah's eyes flickered over her like she was waiting for a mistake. But she noticed. She sipped her water slowly, forcing her hands to stay calm. She could already feel her stomach curling in that familiar way, a slow nod of warning. She had felt it in high school classrooms, in department stores, in lobbies where no one believed she had an appointment. It was a specific kind of tension, one born not from confrontation, but from the effort of having to preempt it. She looked down at her lap and folded her napkin twice. Then she took out her journal. The leather cover was soft and worn. Inside were sketches, formulas, and thoughts she never shared out loud. She flipped to a clean page and began to draw. A vertical thrust system with wing assist stabilizers. It was a prototype she'd been playing with for weeks. The kind of design meant for smaller regional jets to take off and land with less noise and more fuel efficiency. Her pen moved across the paper like it knew the path already. But then a shadow fell across the page. Deborah again. "I'm sorry, miss. I've had a complaint from another passenger. Apparently, there's some concern that this seat might be a misassignment." Amara looked up, confused. "I have a confirmed boarding pass." Deborah's smile returned. Again, it was hollow. "I'm sure that's true, but just to be safe, I'd like to verify your identification." Amara stared at her. For a moment, she wasn't sure she heard correctly. "You want to see my ID?" "Yes, please." Her voice was still coated in faux warmth. Amara slowly reached into her bag, pulled out her wallet, and handed over her Orion Air student ID card and driver's license. Deborah took them both and turned them over in her hand. She looked at the cards, then at Amara, then back at the cards. "Everything checks out," she said finally. "Sorry for the inconvenience, just protocol." But Amara saw the truth in her eyes. This wasn't protocol. This was something else. As Deborah moved away, Amara sat still, her chest rising and falling slowly. Her hands were steady, but her heart was not. She could feel the eyes of 3C on her again. This time she didn't look back. She was trying to breathe, trying to center herself, but her grip on the pen was just a little too tight. She went back to her sketch, but the lines were harder now, sharper. She wasn't designing lift anymore. She was building armor. The plane hadn't even left the gate. Passengers were still boarding in clusters. The overhead compartments rattled open and shut as bags were hoisted and nudged into place. Voices murmured softly. Babies fussed. The air smelled like warm plastic and citrus cleanser. But inside Amara Jennings' chest, it already felt like turbulence. She could sense it coming. She didn't know how she knew, but she did. Something was shifting in the energy of the cabin. There was a tightening, a quiet weight pressing behind her ribcage like her body was bracing itself before her mind caught up. Deborah Whitlow passed her again. This time she didn't smile. Her eyes flicked down to Amara's backpack, then to the sketch pad in her lap. She didn't say a word, just moved on. The man in 3C shifted in his seat. Amara tried to focus. She looked down at her page. She had been working on a revised thrust diagram, an idea for a retractable stabilizer fin that could fold into the belly of the aircraft for more fuel-efficient descents. But her lines were shaky now. She couldn't stop thinking about the way Deborah had looked at her, not with curiosity, with calculation. Across the aisle, a mother buckled her toddler into a seat. The child kicked happily at the tray table and hummed a little song. Something about that sound made Amara's throat tighten. It reminded her of when things felt simple, A day before she had to second-guess every expression directed her way. Before she understood what it meant when someone didn't see you as a passenger, but as a possibility for disruption. The intercom buzzed. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome aboard Orion Flight 203 with nonstop service from Raleigh, Jordan to Denver International. We'll be pushing back shortly. Please ensure all devices are in airplane mode and tray tables are secured. A voice from the cockpit followed. This is Captain Jonah Marks. I'll be flying you today. Looks like clear skies all the way west. We're expecting an on-time departure. The cabin gave a soft collective sigh. Buckles clicked, phones dimmed, the usual rhythm. Then Deborah returned again, walking slowly down the aisle as if scanning for something. Amara felt her stomach drop when she stopped directly beside her. Miss Jennings, Deborah said, may I speak with you privately for a moment? Amara blinked. The words barely made sense. I'm sorry. Would you mind stepping to the galley with me? It'll just take a second. Around her, a few heads turned. The man in 3C shifted again, his eyebrows raised. Amara looked to him, then back to Deborah. Is something wrong? I've had a couple of passengers express concern, Deborah said smoothly. Just need to verify something quickly. It won't take long. Amara's heart started to pound. Not from fear, from familiarity. She had heard this before in other forms. We're just following procedure. It's just a quick clarification. We'd appreciate your cooperation. And always, somehow, she was the one who had to move. The one who had to prove? She stood slowly, carefully. She felt the eyes. Not all of them, but enough. Felt them crawl along the side of her face and across her shoulders as she stepped into the aisle. Deborah motioned her toward the front galley. It was cramped and dim, lined with metal drawers and tucked-away coffee machines. Once they were behind the curtain, Deborah turned. I'm going to need to inspect your carry-on. Amara's breath caught. What, just to be sure? Everything aligns with FAA protocols? I already went through security. I understand. This is just a secondary check. Amara stared at her. There's nothing dangerous in my bag. Deborah nodded as if that weren't the point. Then it won't be a problem. Right, Amara's hands were trembling now. She reached for her backpack, trying to steady herself. As she unzipped it, she spoke slowly. I'm part of a national youth program. I was invited to the summit. I'm traveling under full sponsorship. That includes first-class seating, priority boarding, and checked luggage. Deborah said nothing. Inside the bag, Amara's belongings were neat and labeled. Books, sketches, her backup charger, a box of pencils, her ID lanyard, a granola bar. Deborah rifled through it anyway. Methodical, not gentle. When she was finished, she zipped it up and handed it back with a practiced smile. Thank you. You can return to your seat. Amara didn't move right away. Her legs were stiff. Her mind buzzed with static. Then she stepped back into the aisle. The eyes were still there, and something had changed in them. There wasn't confusion now. There was assumption. Whatever story they'd imagined, they had started to believe it. Back in 3A, Amara sank into her seat and stared out the window. The world outside hadn't changed, but everything inside her had tilted. She reached for her water. The cup was gone, likely cleared during the check. She glanced around, caught Deborah's eye from down the aisle. Excuse me, Amara called gently. Could I please have some water? Deborah didn't respond. Amara tried again. Still nothing. Finally, Deborah walked over, but there was no drink in her hand. You'll have to wait until we're in the air. Her tone was sharp this time. The friendliness gone. But you just served others a minute ago, Amara said quietly. Deborah crossed her arms. "Are you challenging me, Miss Jennings?" Amara blinked. "No, I just asked for water." The man in 3C cleared his throat. Loudly, Deborah turned to him. "Is there something you'd like to say?" "Sir." He shook his head. Amara looked back out the window. Her chest felt tight again. This wasn't miscommunication anymore. This was erosion, a slow stripping down of her presence until it was small enough to ignore or remove. She pulled her sketchpad close again, but she couldn't focus. A part of her wanted to speak, to make a scene, to defend herself in the way adults had always told her not to. Loud enough to be heard, angry enough to be seen, but she didn't. She didn't want to become the problem. So she sat still, quiet, drawing invisible lines on the back of her hand with her fingertip, trying to stay grounded. But in her silence, she was being rewritten. And she knew the next move was coming. It happened faster than she expected and somehow slower than she could bear. Amara was staring out the window, trying to count the rivets on the wing to keep her thoughts steady. Her fingers had gone numb from clutching the edge of her sketchpad, and her jaw ached from holding it so tight. The feeling in her chest had turned to something sour. Not fear exactly. It was something she couldn't name. A kind of grief that didn't belong here. Like being told the house you were born in had been bulldozed. Then she heard it. The click of a phone. The rustle of a uniform. The change in tone. "Excuse me, miss." It wasn't Deborah this time. It was a new voice. Flat. Commanding. Male. She looked up into the face of a man with a crew cut and a square jaw. He wore a blazer marked with airport security insignia and a stern look that had long since forgotten how to soften. "Please step into the aisle," he said. Amara blinked. "Why?" He didn't answer the question. Instead, he gestured to the front of the plane. "Now." A ripple passed through the cabin like wind through wheat. Passengers sat straighter. Some glanced at one another, questioning. Others avoided eye contact entirely. "I haven't done anything," Amara said, her voice quiet. The officer didn't move. "You've been reported for non-compliance." Non-compliance of what a moment passed. A silence loud enough to draw blood. "Please don't make this harder than it has to be." Amara looked over at Deborah, who stood a few rows back, arms crossed, watching. Her throat felt dry. Her hands trembled slightly. "I'm 16 years old," she said, barely more than a whisper. The man didn't flinch. "Step out of the seat." The mother with the toddler in 4B wrapped her arms around her child protectively. A man behind Amara pulled his phone halfway out of his jacket. Another whispered, "What is going on?" And then Gloria Mayfield spoke. The elderly woman across the aisle leaned forward, voice clear and unwavering. "This young lady has been polite and quiet since she boarded. I've watched it all. She hasn't raised her voice, hasn't broken a rule. What exactly is she being accused of?" The officer turned toward her. "Ma'am, I need you to remain seated." Gloria didn't blink. "And I need you to explain why you're targeting a child while the rest of us watch." A few more murmurs now. Someone cleared their throat loudly. Another passenger raised a phone higher. The tide was turning, ever so slightly, but it didn't stop what happened next. The officer stepped forward, reached down, and took Amara by the wrist. The grip wasn't violent, but it was firm. Too firm. A grip that said, "I don't care how old you are. Let go of me," Amara said softly. "Then walk," he answered. She stood, slowly, dignity in every movement, her limbs stiff, her chest burning. "You don't have the right to." Her voice broke off as he reached for her other arm, and in that instant, she lost her balance. Her foot caught on the corner of the seat. Her temple struck the armrest. There was a dull thud, and then silence. When she looked up, the world was tilted sideways. A warm line of blood slid past her eyebrow. She didn't scream, didn't sob. She simply blinked as it blurred her vision. Gas filled the cabin. A woman cried out. Someone shouted, "She's bleeding!" A man stood up from the back row. Deborah moved forward quickly, eyes wide now with something close to panic. I didn't mean for, but it was too late. Amara sat back into the seat, blood now dotting her collar. "I want to call my father," she said softly. The officer hesitated. For a second, the spell of assumed authority cracked. "And who's your father?" he asked with a half-laugh. Amara looked up. "Darius Jennings." The name landed like a dropped wrench in an engine room. The man blinked. "You're lying." Amara didn't respond, because she didn't need to. From the end of the jet bridge, hurried steps echoed forward, measured, sharp, like a man not running but about to stop the world from spinning. And then he appeared, Darius Jennings. He took one look at his daughter's face, the smear of blood at her temple, and the cuff still dangling loosely from one wrist, and everything in his body turned to fire beneath ice. He stepped into the cabin. No one breathed. His voice came low, controlled. Who touched her? No one spoke. Then, slowly, the officer raised his hand. "I was acting under crew protocol." "I didn't know." Darius turned to Deborah. "You called for him." She tried to compose herself. There were complaints. She refused to comply. With "You mean she asked for water?" Deborah opened her mouth, closed it again. Darius stepped forward, eyes locked on hers. "You're suspended. Effective immediately. Exit the plane. But now," he turned to the officer, "you'll wait at the gate. My legal team will brief you in 20 minutes. Until then, I suggest you sit." Amara hadn't moved. Her breathing was shallow, but her eyes were dry. Darius knelt down beside her. "You okay?" She nodded, slowly. He reached into his jacket and gently pressed a white cloth to her temple. "I'm sorry I wasn't here sooner." "I didn't cry," she whispered. He smiled. "Just barely. You don't have to be strong right now." "Yes," she said. "I do." All around them, passengers sat frozen. But the silence now was not complicity. It was clarity. Someone had seen what was done and refused to let it stay buried. Darius stood. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, "I apologize for the delay, and for the injustice you just witnessed. It ends today, not tomorrow, not with press releases. Right now." He turned to the captain's intercom and picked up the handset. "Flight 203 will continue under a new crew. Those who have lost faith in what this airline should stand for are free to disembark. But know this young woman is not the problem. She is the reason we fix the problem." And in that moment, for the first time since she had boarded, Amara felt seen, not as a threat, not as a mistake, but as the reason a broken sky might begin to heal. The plane was silent, not the usual hush of departure, not the soft lull of altitude or sleeping passengers. This was the kind of silence that followed something real, a silence that held its breath. Amara Jennings sat in seat 3A, one cuff still dangling from her wrist, her temple marked with a fading crimson streak. Her sketch pad had slipped to the floor during the scuffle. She hadn't bent down to retrieve it. She didn't need to right now. The design would still be there when she was ready. Across from her, Gloria Mayfield remained seated in 3B, her gaze steady and proud. She didn't speak, but when Amara turned her head slightly, their eyes met. And that was enough. Darius Jennings stood by the cockpit door, phone pressed to his ear, voice low but unmistakably firm. No negotiations. This doesn't go through PR. This goes through policy, board, and federal compliance. Pause. I want the name of every officer involved in approving today's airport security dispatch. And I want the footage pulled from all JetBridge cameras within the hour. Another pause. If they try to spin this, I walk. With my ownership shares? The silence in the cabin wasn't just from awe. It was shifting. Passengers who had kept their heads down were now glancing toward Amara, not with suspicion, but with a kind of protective discomfort. An awareness. Some were pulling out phones. Others were whispering. The man from 3C had disappeared quietly during the commotion, but many stayed, watching, processing. The flight had not yet taken off, but the journey had already begun. The replacement crew arrived 15 minutes later. A younger flight attendant with warm eyes and a visible tremor in her hands offered Amara a glass of water and a soft apology. "I'm so sorry this happened. To you. Amara nodded once and took the water. She didn't say anything. Not yet. When the plane finally pushed back from the gate, the world outside the window had shifted shades. Dusk had begun to settle, coating the tarmac in a pale orange glaze. The city skyline shimmered far off in the haze. Amara leaned her head against the cool glass and closed her eyes. She didn't sleep. She thought. About how quickly truth could blur. About how easily dignity could be stripped when you wore the wrong skin in the wrong seat. About how the plane had only needed one frightened lie and one silent crowd to unravel everything she thought she had earned. And still, she was here. She turned her thoughts to her mother, Celeste Harper, who had once told her, "You can't always prevent injustice, baby, but you can refuse to disappear beneath it." Amara didn't disappear. Instead, she slowly opened her sketch pad and began to draw again. Not the plane. Not this time. She drew herself, sitting tall, eyes forward, blood on her cheek, but hands still working, still building. She didn't even realize her seatmate was watching. "You're an artist," Gloria said quietly. Amara smiled for the first time in hours. "I'm an engineer," she replied. Gloria nodded approvingly. "You can be both." They flew on in silence for a while. At cruising altitude, the internet connection returned. Devices lit up. News alerts began to flash. The footage had made it out. Someone in economy had filmed the moment the officer grabbed Amara's arm. The image of her falling, the blood, the silence. The video had already gone viral. The caption read, "She asked for water. They called the cops." Screens buzzed. Social media flooded. Hashtags began to form like protest lines. Amara Jennings, Mosh first class. Doesn't mean safe. Let her fly. Darius was. There in the front row. A teenage boy showed the video to his father. The man nodded slowly and said nothing. Another woman dabbed her eyes with a tissue. A corporate traveler typed a message on his laptop, then hesitated before hitting send. Amara saw none of it. She was still drawing, not for the world, for herself. The flight attendant approached again, this time holding a blanket and a small first aid kit. "May I?" Amara looked up and nodded. The woman knelt gently beside her, cleaning the last of the blood near her temple, then wrapping a soft blanket around her shoulders. "Your dad's incredible," she whispered. Amara didn't say anything at first. Then, softly, "He's not perfect, but he fights." The woman smiled, then returned to the galley. Darius returned to his daughter's side once the phone calls were done. He didn't speak immediately, just sat beside her, his broad shoulders suddenly looking tired. "You okay?" he asked. "I don't know," she said honestly. He nodded. "That's fair." Amara traced her finger over the page again. The drawing was almost finished. "Will they believe me?" Darius didn't look at her when he answered. Some won't, but the right ones will, and the truth will carry farther than you think. She nodded slowly, then looked at him. Was I too quiet? Should I have said something sooner? Darius turned to her, eyes softening. You didn't owe anyone a performance. Silence doesn't mean weakness. Sometimes it means clarity. The fact that you stayed calm, that's not submission. That's power. Amara let the words sit in her chest. She needed them to anchor something inside her. Then she opened a new page and began a fresh design. This time, not an aircraft system, but a cabin blueprint. An idea for a new seating configuration, one that placed people in community, not hierarchy. Circular clusters, face-to-face layouts, accessibility first. Her father watched over her shoulder. You're redesigning the sky, he said softly. No, Amar answered. I'm just making sure it belongs to everyone. As the lights dimmed and the plane drifted into the last leg of its journey, Amara Jennings sat with her head high, the wound on her temple glowing faintly in the light, and her hand still moving, line by line, toward a future no one could take from her. The plane had landed 37 minutes ahead of schedule, but for Amara Jennings, it felt like a lifetime later. She stood just inside the jet bridge at Denver International, her backpack slung over one shoulder, her sketchpad held against her chest like a shield. The world beyond the plane had shifted. She could feel it in the eyes of the gate agents, in the way their hands hovered awkwardly above their keyboards, unsure whether to offer a smile or an apology. A soft chime rang as passengers stepped off behind her, one by one. Some avoided her gaze entirely. Others looked at her too long, but no one said anything. Then came the flash. Just outside the glass wall, past the gate's corridor, someone snapped a photo. Then another. Phones were raised. Not many, but enough. She didn't flinch. Darius stood behind her, hand gentle on her back. He wore the look of a man who had spent hours fighting behind the scenes and knew the battle was only beginning. You can go to the hotel with Gloria and Miles, he said softly. I'll stay and handle the press. Amara didn't answer immediately. She turned to look out at the growing cluster near the arrival gate. News crews, some bloggers, airport employees whispering into their radios. A woman held a cardboard sign that said, "We believe you," in pink marker. Amara's eyes settled on it for a long time. Gloria Mayfield stepped beside her. People are watching, Gloria said gently, but that doesn't mean you owe them anything. Amara turned to her. Then why does it feel like I do? Gloria placed a hand on her arm. Because you were raised with integrity. But baby, there's a difference between being a voice and being a symbol. Only you get to choose which one you become. That stayed with her. Later, in the town car that took them to the Summit Hotel. Amara sat between Gloria and Miles Grant, her father's executive assistant, and one of the few corporate faces she trusted. He didn't speak unless necessary, but when he did, his words were clear. We've received 3 official interview requests already, Miles said, his tablet glowing faintly in the dark cabin, NBC, CBS, and one from This Morning America, all requesting Amara, not Darius. She didn't look up. I'm not a celebrity, she said. No, Miles replied. You're a catalyst. She pressed her forehead to the window, watching streetlights blur against the glass. A catalyst. She didn't ask to be that either. She closed her eyes and thought of the quiet before takeoff, of the glass of water she never received, of the hand around her wrist, of the words she never got to say. She didn't sleep that night. Not really. She lay awake in the soft hotel bed. Sketchpad open beside her, but her pencil unmoving. She wasn't sure what to draw now. She wasn't even sure who she was drawing for. At 2:13 a.m., she turned on the television. Her own face stared back at her from the screen. Grainy footage. Her voice barely audible beneath cabin noise. The blood down her cheek frozen in still frame. Underneath, the caption, "Black teen detained." After asking for water in first class, her father was the airline CEO. There it was. They had made her a headline. Her phone buzzed. She ignored it. It buzzed again. This time, it was a text from her mother. C.E.All. I'm proud of you. And I'm furious. I'll be on the next flight out. Another text from an unknown number. Hi, Amara. I'm Liana from the Rising Voice podcast. We tell stories that change laws. We'd be honored to help tell yours. No spin, just truth. Amara stared at the screen, then put it face down on the nightstand. She sat up slowly, walked to the window, and looked out across Denver's city lights. The buildings rose like paper stacks in the distance. A quiet world, one that didn't know her pain and wouldn't care unless she packaged it cleanly for their consumption. She felt sick. She returned to the bed, opened her sketch pad, and finally, her pencil moved. But this time she wasn't drawing cabins, or wings, or systems. She drew a girl in a uniform, standing alone in the aisle of a plane, face calm, hands folded. Above her, the lights flickered. Behind her, rows of passengers blurred into shadows. In front of her, a man pointed, not in anger, but in fear. She titled the piece, "This Seat Was Paid For." The next morning, Miles brought her breakfast yogurt, fruit, tea, and news. Your video has been viewed 9 million times. There are already calls for a Department of Transportation investigation, and Orion stock opened 10 points down. Amara blinked. I didn't want that, she said. I know, Miles replied, but sometimes justice comes with a price tag. He paused, then set a printed letter on her table. It's from the Summit Board. They still want you to speak at tonight's event, but you have the right to decline. She picked up the letter. Read it, reread it, then looked up. They invited me because I was a rising star, she said softly. They invited you because you earned it, Miles said. Don't let what happened take that away from you. She thought about it all day, in the mirror, in the elevator, in the hotel lobby, where a guest stopped her with teary eyes and said, You reminded me of my niece. Thank you. By the time the sun set, she still hadn't decided, until she opened her inbox and saw one final message. From Captain Jonah Marks, subject. I'm sorry. Message I should have said something on that plane. I failed you. I saw what was happening and I said nothing. I've resigned. But if you speak tonight, I'll be in the audience, and I'll listen. That did it. She stood, got dressed, and walked into the fire. The ballroom was hushed before she even stepped onto the stage. Over 400 people packed into the grand hall of the Summit Hotel, beneath gilded chandeliers and silver-draped banners. The air held a strange tension, a cocktail of anticipation, guilt, and reverence. It was no longer just a youth engineering event. It had become something else, a reckoning in real time. Amara Jennings stood in the wings, heart thudding quietly beneath the soft folds of her navy blue dress. It wasn't fancy, just one she'd packed for the panel, a modest choice she now realized would be broadcast across the country. Next to her stood Gloria Mayfield, watching the audience like a sentinel. I know you're scared, Gloria said gently, and that's okay. But the words inside you matter more than the fear outside you. Amara nodded, lips pressed together. Then the lights shifted. The MC's voice came over the speakers. And now, please welcome to the stage our youngest keynote guest, Ms. Amara Jennings. Applause swelled as she stepped forward. Not thunderous, not obligatory, It was the kind of clapping people do when they don't know whether to cheer or bow their heads. She walked slowly, not timidly, not triumphantly, but with the quiet steadiness of someone who had endured something that should never have happened and still chose to rise. The microphone stood too tall. She adjusted it with both hands, looked out over the sea of expectant faces. She began, not with a quote or a joke, but with the truth. I didn't want to be up here tonight. The room was still. I didn't ask for attention. I didn't ask for the spotlight. I didn't ask to be filmed, posted, dissected, or defended. She paused. I asked for water, a few gasps, a shifting in chairs. I was 16, in first class, traveling to speak at this very event. I was excited, nervous, prepared, and then I was mistaken for something dangerous. Her voice didn't waver, though her hands trembled slightly at her sides. I was labeled disruptive, investigated, detained, and hurt. Not because of my behavior, but because of someone else's fear. Because I didn't look like what they expected in that seat. She scanned the room slowly. Let me say this clearly, I earned that seat. I belonged in that seat. And still, I was treated like a threat. Someone in the back stood, then sat. The ripple of movement passed, but Amara didn't flinch. I want to tell you what that moment did to me. Not physically, I'm healing, but inside. She took a breath. This part was harder. For years, I was taught to be good, to be excellent, to be quiet. I followed the rules. I excelled in school. I dreamed big, because I believed that if I was polite enough, smart enough, non-threatening enough, I would be safe. Her voice cracked, just for a moment. But excellence doesn't protect us from bias. Decency doesn't exempt us from injustice. And silence doesn't stop someone from seeing you as less. She let those words settle. Let the audience absorb the weight. I don't want pity, she continued. I want awareness. I want change. I want the people in this room, engineers, leaders, CEOs, gatekeepers, to ask yourselves who gets to belong in your spaces. Who do you assume is out of place? Who do you protect and who do you ignore? Eyes were wet now. Even the MC had placed a hand over her heart. I didn't come here tonight to relive my trauma. I came here to remind you that every seat on a plane, in a boardroom, in a university is a seat someone like me had to fight to sit in. She looked down for a second, gathering herself, and I'm tired of fighting to be seen. Then, slowly, she raised her sketch pad. This, she said, holding it up, is my latest design. A new cabin layout, not based on class or priority or status, but on community, inclusion, respect. She flipped it open to the schematic she'd drawn just last night. I'm not an activist. I'm not an influencer. I'm an engineer. But I believe engineering is about solving problems. And the biggest one we face isn't mechanical, it's human. Silence. I didn't want to speak tonight, but I needed to. Because this isn't just about me. It's about every black girl who has been mistaken for a problem. Every child who's learned to shrink themselves. Every young dreamer who's been asked to prove their worth over and over just to sit down. Her final words came softer, slower, almost like a whisper meant for each listener's heart. We are not passengers in this world. We are architects of its future, and if I'm going to keep flying, it has to be toward a better one. She stepped back. The room erupted. Not just applause, but a wave of standing people, shouting her name, clapping with urgency, with pride, with apology. Some wiped tears, others raised fists. And at the very back, near the exit doors, stood Captain Jonah Marks, his pilot's uniform replaced with a gray sweater, his eyes red, his hands in a quiet salute. Amara didn't cry. Not then. She nodded once to the crowd, then turned and walked off stage, her shoulders straighter, her steps lighter, back in the wings. Gloria hugged her tightly. Miles stood nearby, his phone buzzing with nonstop press calls, but he said nothing, just gave her a small smile and a quiet, "Well done." Her father waited in the hallway. Darius didn't speak immediately. He just looked at her, and in his eyes there was no CEO, no title, just a father seeing his daughter for who she truly was. More than brave, more than dignified, a force. "You changed the room," he said. She looked at him with a tired smile. "No," she replied. "I just told the truth." By sunrise, Amara's face was everywhere, not just news segments. It was podcasts, panel debates, thought pieces with titles like Grace in the Aisle, What Amara Jennings Taught Us About America and Too Young to Be This Strong. Her speech had gone viral, but so had the reactions. Within hours, Orion Air's official site crashed from traffic overload. The airline's social media was flooded, thousands of reposts, tags, praise, fury, apology, defense, critique, all tangled together like storm wires after a hurricane. At first, it overwhelmed her. She sat in the hotel room, her phone buzzing nonstop beside her, refusing to pick it up. Her sketchpad lay untouched on the dresser. She hadn't expected it to spread so far, so fast. She had spoken from her heart. She hadn't tried to go viral. She wasn't a movement leader. She was just Amara. But the world wanted more. Some of it was beautiful. Messages from girls she'd never met. "I saw myself in you. I used to feel invisible until last night. You're why I won't stay quiet anymore." Others were gutting. "You're a race-baiting brat who wanted attention." Another entitled kid playing victim. "First class. Try earning it next time." Her stomach turned when she read that one. She had earned it, top of her class, robotics champion, engineering fellowship. But somehow, in the eyes of strangers, none of that mattered because of one thing: she couldn't change her skin. She threw her phone across the bed and curled up beside the window. Her shoulders trembled, but no tears came. She had cried enough in silence for a lifetime. There was a knock at the door. She didn't answer. Another knock. This time softer. "It's Mom," came the voice from the hallway. Amara rushed to open the door. Celeste Harper stepped inside. Tired, fierce, elegant in her gray blazer and natural curls pulled into a low bun. The kind of woman who could walk into a courtroom and silence the room with a glance. But right now, she was just a mother reaching for her daughter. Amara folded into her arms without a word. For several minutes, they didn't speak. When they finally sat, Celeste reached into her purse and pulled out a thick folder. "Legal review," she said. "For the airline. For the officer. For the video rights. I've been up since 3, prepping. But we'll go at your pace. You're not a case file. You're my child." Amara smiled faintly, then frowned. "Some people are saying I made it up, or that I'm overreacting." Celeste didn't blink, and some people said Ruby Bridges was too young to walk into a school. That didn't stop her either. Amara nodded slowly. "I don't want this to be my whole identity." "It won't be," her mother said firmly. "But you don't get to decide how the world labels you, only how you wear it." She held her daughter's hand tightly. "This happened to you. It shouldn't have. And now, people are uncomfortable. That's not your fault. That's their awakening." Amara inhaled deeply. For the first time in days, she felt her lungs fully expand. Later that afternoon, The Jennings family held a closed-door meeting in a quiet conference suite on the hotel's top floor. Darius, Celeste, Miles, and Yasmin Patel. Orion Air's VP of Customer Equity gathered around a table littered with legal briefs, press drafts, and board meeting agendas. Darius looked exhausted, his usual cool composure strained by days of media whiplash and corporate fallout. "We've received resignation letters from 5 executives," he said. "2 others are under review," Miles added. "Flight bookings are down, but stock is stabilizing. Investors are watching." Celeste leaned in. "And the Department of Transportation investigating," Darius said. "They've subpoenaed security footage, incident reports, internal crew messaging logs, everything." Yasmin, who had been quiet until now, finally spoke. "I've reviewed the crew transcript from that flight. Deborah Whitlow didn't just escalate needlessly. She used racially coded language in her report. Words like aggressive, unpredictable, defiant. About a 16-year-old girl who was sitting silently in her seat." Amara clenched her fists in her lap. Yasmin continued, voice firm. "We can't spin this. We shouldn't. We need structural change, not just PR statements." Darius nodded. "I want policy rewrites, bias training, real-time discrimination reporting on board, and a formal equity council run independently. No exceptions." Amara's voice came in, quiet but certain, and a youth advisory board. Everyone looked at her. She repeated it. A board of young flyers, diverse, trained, unpaid, but consulted for every in-flight policy change. Let them help shape the future they'll inherit. The room went still. Then Celeste smiled. "Now that," she said, "is leadership." It was the first time Amara felt ownership not of pain, but of power. That night, Darius released an official video statement, not through a press agency, but straight from his phone, raw, unfiltered, direct. "My name is Darius Jennings," he began. "I'm the CEO of Orion Air, and more importantly, I'm the father of Amara Jennings." He paused. "What happened to my daughter should not happen to anyone. And it happened on my watch, on my plane, under my company's name." He didn't flinch, didn't pass the blame. "So we will not release a statement today. We will release a new standard." He outlined every reform in clear human terms, from training to transparency, from protocol changes to open hearings. And he ended with this: "We fly thousands of people every day, from all walks of life. And if the skies aren't safe for a child like my daughter, they're not safe for any of us." The video reached 10 million views by morning. Some praised him. Others accused him of using his child as a shield. But Amara didn't care. For the first time, she knew they were building something real, not just to fix the past, but to shape the future. A future where no child had to bleed in silence. A future where every seat came with dignity, not judgment. And she would help design it, line by line, policy by policy, seat by seat. The office was quiet, not cold or sterile like most corporate towers, but warm, deliberate. Floor-to-ceiling windows wrapped around the 18th floor of Orion Air's downtown headquarters. Light spilled across framed blueprints, aviation models, and walls lined with photos from the company's first days. Amara stood near the corner window, her fingers gently brushing a black and white photo of a 1970s flight crew. All white, all smiling. She turned toward her father. "You ever think," she said slowly, "about how much these people never saw coming?" Darius Jennings smiled softly, setting a folder on the desk behind her. "Every day," he replied. "They didn't imagine people like you walking through their terminals, much less designing them." Amara turned back to the window. The sky beyond was sharp and blue, clean, endless. Feels heavy sometimes, she said. Darius stepped beside her. It is, but not too heavy for you. She didn't answer, just nodded. He opened the folder and slid it toward her. Review this. It's the proposed structure for the Youth Advisory Board. Your idea? They want your input before we launch. She flipped through the pages. A diverse range of students, ages 15 to 22, regional rotations, scholarships attached to participation, regular forums. They actually listened, she said. They didn't just listen. Darius replied. They followed. There was something surreal about reading her name in an official organizational chart. Amara Jennings, founding chair, Youth Aviation Equity Board. A few weeks ago, she just wanted to speak at a conference and go home. Now she was helping re-engineer the very structure of an airline. It still didn't feel real, but it mattered. Let's give them something solid, she said, picking up a pen. Something they can't ignore or water down later. Darius smiled and left her to work. Downstairs. Yasmin Patel stood before a small crowd of reporters, her voice calm, her posture firm. She outlined the policy changes already underway. Mandatory anti-bias training for all flight crew and gate personnel, onboard incident reporting protocols, visible in every seatback guide, a new chief diversity officer, reporting directly to the board, and the most radical change elimination of traditional class labels on short domestic flights. No more first class, no more economy, just seats, she said. The announcement sent tremors through the industry. Commentators called it bold, unrealistic, symbolic, but passengers noticed, and many approved. In the following weeks, Orion's bookings stabilized, then began to climb. Something had shifted, not just in operations, but in tone. Passengers wrote in to say they'd felt safer, seen, heard. Black flight attendants reached out to thank leadership for what they called the first time someone fought for us. Other airlines began to quietly study Orion's policies. Change was happening, slowly, unevenly, but undeniably. Amara, meanwhile, returned to school. The first few days were a blur of stares and whispered questions. Some teachers asked for selfies. Others avoided her entirely. Students flooded her with praise and projected onto her their own narratives. But Amara stayed grounded. She didn't need to be a hero. Just herself. She focused on her classes, her designs, her board meetings, held virtually every other Saturday. Her team of young advisors quickly became her second family brilliant kids from Detroit, Oakland, Atlanta, Tulsa, each of them carrying their own stories of being overlooked, underestimated, silenced. Now, they had a voice, and Amara listened. In the third week of the board's formation, one of the youngest members, a soft-spoken, hijab-wearing girl from Houston, shared a story that made the whole Zoom room go quiet. She had been stopped at an airport 2 years ago, pulled aside, questioned. Not because of anything she said or did, but because she fit a profile. Amara didn't respond with policy. She responded with empathy. I see you, she said softly. And you belong here? The girl nodded, her voice breaking as she whispered, Thank you. That's when Amara knew this wasn't about airplanes. It was about dignity, visibility, the right to move through the world without needing permission. One afternoon, Gloria Mayfield visited Amara's school. They sat beneath an oak tree on campus. Gloria wore her signature floral scarf, her eyes hidden behind wide, cat-eye sunglasses. I watched your last board meeting, she said. You watch Zoom calls. Amara laughed. I watch you. Gloria replied, You've become something rare. Amara tilted her head. And what's that A bridge? Amara looked down at her sketchpad. I just want to build things that last. Ah, Gloria smiled. Then start by building yourself. The world will follow. They sat in silence. 2 generations, shaped by different battles, united by the same dream. Later that week, Amara got an email from Captain Jonah Marks. He had taken a leave of absence, but now he was returning to the skies, not as a captain, as a trainer, leading the new cohort of crew members through the restructured orientation, a curriculum Amara had helped outline. His email was brief. I wanted to thank you for holding a mirror to all of us, for not letting me look away. She replied, Thank you for looking. Most don't. The days passed, the noise faded, but Amara's name didn't. Not because of a headline, because of the foundation she helped lay. The board kept growing. Her team kept meeting. Her designs evolved. She had begun working on a new prototype, a modular cabin system that could adjust for families, mobility needs, and long-haul comfort, without relying on the hierarchy of status. She called it the EquiSeat. One night, while sketching late at her desk, her father passed by her door. He paused. You okay? Amara looked up. I'm tired, she admitted, but not the bad kind. He stepped inside and sat beside her. Your mom and I, we're proud of you. She leaned her head against his shoulder. You know, she said softly, none of this would have happened if I'd just gotten that glass of water. He chuckled gently. True? But then again, maybe the world was thirsty for something else. They sat there together, under the soft glow of her desk lamp, a father and daughter, not just survivors of injustice, but co-architects of change. The world hadn't given her a choice, so she made one for herself, not just to speak, but to build. And she wasn't finished, not even close. The sun was low on the horizon, streaking the Denver airport tarmac in a warm amber haze as Amara made her way toward Gate C-22. She wasn't flying for business, not this time. It had been 3 months since her speech, 3 months since the board launched, since the reforms rolled out, since Captain Marks became a lead trainer, since people stopped whispering in hallways and started speaking on record. It wasn't quiet yet, not by a long shot, but it was better. She had taken time to heal, to rest. The whirlwind had slowed. And this morning, she was flying home alone for her grandmother's 80th birthday. A simple flight. No cameras, no headlines, just Amara. She moved through security with practiced ease. Her ID now met with quiet nods rather than suspicion. TSA agents had memorized her face from the press, but most treated her like any other passenger. A few offered her kind, wordless glances. One whispered, "Thank you," as she returned her tray. By the time she reached her gate, she was early. She settled into a window seat in the waiting area, her backpack at her feet, sketchpad in her lap. It felt like any other day, until a voice called out behind her. Flight 714 to Atlanta will begin pre-boarding shortly. Amara looked up. The gate agent wasn't the one who made her pause. It was the woman assisting her. In Orion blue, a familiar walk, a familiar stiffness in the shoulders. Deborah Whitlow. Amara froze. She hadn't heard the name in weeks. Deborah had been placed on leave following the investigation. Rumors had swirled. Some said she'd been fired. Others said she had resigned. Yet here she was, not in first class, not as lead crew, but working the gate. Amara didn't move. Her pencil hovered above the page. Deborah looked different. Her hair was shorter. She looked older, like the weeks had weighed on her more than years ever did. Her posture, once rigid with entitlement, was now cautious, reserved. Her voice lacked its usual bite. She caught sight of Amara. Their eyes met. Deborah paused mid-step. Her mouth parted slightly, not in anger, in recognition, and maybe fear. Amara waited. She didn't look away. She didn't stand. She didn't flinch. Deborah turned and walked into the gate desk, head down, saying something quietly to her coworker. Her hands trembled just enough to notice. Amara exhaled. She hadn't expected this. She had played this moment in her mind more than once, imagined confronting her, saying all the things she hadn't gotten to say, maybe even shouting. But now that it was real, it didn't feel like fire. It felt like weight. A few minutes later, Amara stood when her boarding group was called. She moved with quiet purpose toward the gate. Deborah was still behind the desk, sorting standby tags, trying not to look up. But just as Amara handed over her boarding pass, she paused. She turned. Deborah looked up again. Caught. Amara stepped closer. The two women stood just feet apart, in full view of the quiet gate lounge. Deborah opened her mouth, but Amara spoke first. "You remember me?" Deborah nodded slowly. "Yes." Amara's voice didn't shake. "You put your hands on me. You called security. You escalated because you didn't like where I was sitting." Deborah's eyes dropped to the counter. Amara continued, "I wasn't loud. I wasn't rude. I was just there." Deborah finally whispered, "I know." For a moment, neither said anything. Passengers moved behind them. The boarding chime sounded again, but time had paused between them. "I don't want an apology," Amara said. "I don't even need one." Deborah's face tensed. Amara leaned in slightly, not with aggression, but precision. "I just want you to ask yourself, every time you look at a passenger, what assumptions are you carrying?" Deborah nodded again. "I've been every day." Her voice cracked. "They made me take the training. But that wasn't what changed me. It was you." Amara stood still. Deborah swallowed. "I see you now. I didn't before. And I'm sorry I made you bleed." There it was. The apology. Not rehearsed, not perfect, but real. Amara didn't smile, didn't nod. She just took it in. Then she said, softly, "You didn't just make me bleed. You reminded me why I have to fight to sit anywhere I belong." Deborah's eyes filled with tears. Amara turned, boarding pass in hand, and walked through the gate. She didn't look back. The flight was calm, no commotion, no stares. She took her seat near the back this time, by choice, by quiet. A young man across the aisle recognized her but didn't interrupt, just offered a small salute and returned to his headphones. She pulled out her sketch pad, drew a long cabin interior, labeled every seat with a different word: respect, presence, witness, voice, belonging. She paused over the last one. Then, in neat handwriting, she labeled her seat unapologetically mine. As the plane began to taxi, she looked out the window. The tarmac passed beneath them, and somewhere behind her, in a different terminal, Deborah Whitlow was probably watching another plane board, maybe carrying this moment with her, maybe changed, maybe not. But Amara didn't carry her anymore. She had let it go. Not because it didn't matter, but because she had something better to carry now. A future. It was the first time Amara had been back to the hangar. The private one at the Orion Air headquarters, where test planes slept under steel ribs and workers moved with soft-footed focus. Even on weekends, everything smelled like metal, fuel, and memory. The scent was oddly comforting. She stood beside her father, watching engineers install modular prototypes into a stripped-down aircraft shell. The Equiseat system her design. Not theory, not a concept sketch in a journal. Real, functional, approved for testing. She had named the test aircraft Hope 227 in quiet homage to the flight where it had all begun. Darius looked over at her. "You ready?" Amara nodded. "More than I've ever been." They stepped onto the platform and into the cabin. No first class, no economy, just open, modular seating, labeled only by function mobility spaces, quiet zones, family clusters, workspace pods. It looked nothing like the traditional divide she remembered, and everything like the world she wanted to see. "This," her father whispered, "is what legacy looks like." She turned to him. "Yours or mine?" Darius smiled, resting a hand on her shoulder. "Ours." She wandered toward the front of the cabin and sat down in the first seat on the left, unlabeled, unassigned, just open. She rested her palms on her knees and let out a breath she didn't realize she'd been holding. Her father stepped away, giving her space. A few minutes passed in silence. Then soft footsteps approached behind her. It was Gloria Mayfield. The older woman had insisted on visiting the prototype. "Wanted to see what revolution looks like in aluminum," she'd said over the phone. Amara stood to greet her. Gloria chuckled, waving her hand. "Sit, baby. This is your plane now." Amara smiled and sat. Gloria moved slowly, sitting across from her. "You know," she said, eyes drifting over the cabin, "when I was your age, we couldn't sit in the front of a bus." Amara looked up. "I read about that." Gloria nodded. "And now, you've redesigned the front of a plane." They both laughed, soft and full. It wasn't pride that filled Amara's chest in that moment. It was peace, the kind that only comes when something unfinished finally lands. "Do you ever wonder," Amara asked, "if we'll stop having to prove we belong?" Gloria didn't answer at first. Then, with a sigh, she said, "No, but I believe one day we'll stop asking for permission." Amara stared out the cabin window, where sunlight touched the curve of a wing like a promise. "I think," she said slowly, "we're already starting to—" Later that evening, Amara sat alone in her room, flipping through her sketch pad. Not just drawings now. Letters, clippings, handwritten notes from kids across the country. One from a girl in South Carolina. "I showed your speech to my teacher when they told me to change my hair. They changed the dress code instead." One from a boy in Minnesota I used to hate flying. "I felt watched. Now I feel seen." One from an entire 6th grade class in Oakland. "Thanks for giving us a voice." She traced her finger over their names. These were the people she did it for. Not the media, not the executives, but for the ones still learning how to speak. Her phone buzzed beside her. It was Miles Grant. He'd been promoted, now the chief strategy officer at Orion Air. But he still texted her like a protective big brother. "Final video ready. Want to preview it." Before we air tomorrow, Amara opened the link. It was a new campaign, a soft launch of the EquiSeat program and the airline's restructured service model. But it didn't start with the product. It started with her voice. From the speech she gave months ago, "I didn't ask for attention. I didn't ask for the spotlight. I asked for water." The screen cut to footage of families boarding together. A black child being welcomed onto a plane by a smiling flight attendant. A teen girl wearing an Orient sweatshirt sitting in a window seat, sketching quietly. More of her words played over it. "I earned that seat. I belonged in that seat. And still, I was treated like a threat." Then it cut to her father, in uniform, helping a wheelchair passenger adjust. "To belong is not to beg. It is a birthright." The final frame faded in slowly. Amara standing on the tarmac, arms crossed, head held high, sunlight behind her. Orion Air, the sky belongs to everyone. Her breath caught. She didn't cry. Not this time. She just smiled. A full, quiet, knowing smile. There was no vindication in it, only peace. The next day, she boarded a flight to Chicago. Another speech, another city, another story. She wore no makeup, no heels, just sneakers and a hoodie. Her curls were up in a puff, her bag slung low on one shoulder. She walked calmly toward her gate. Passengers around her didn't whisper. They smiled. She nodded back. A child waved. She waved back. A flight attendant held the boarding door open wide. "Welcome aboard. Miss Jennings," she said. "We're honored to have you." Amara stepped through without hesitation. Sat down in her seat right in the middle of the plane this time. She looked around. So many different faces. Old, young, brown, pale, loud, quiet. And in that moment, it all felt right. Not because it was perfect, but because she had helped make it possible. She leaned her head back, closed her eyes, and exhaled. This wasn't the end. It was only takeoff. And now, she knew without question the sky belonged to her, too. She could have stayed quiet. She could have walked off that plane, buried the pain, and gone back to being invisible. But instead, Amara Jennings chose to stand. She didn't scream. She didn't fight. She told the truth calmly, clearly, and held up a mirror to an industry built on unspoken prejudice. And in doing so, she changed everything. This story is a reminder that dignity doesn't require power. It reveals it. That a teenage girl, wrongly profiled, publicly humiliated, can still hold the world accountable, with nothing more than her voice. And that racism doesn't always wear a hood. Sometimes it wears a name tag. Sometimes it serves coffee. Sometimes it smiles while it erases you. But not this time. This time, the world watched. And thanks to Amar, it listened. If this story moved you, please like, share, and subscribe. Your support helps amplify voices that too often go unheard. And don't go far, because in our next video, we reveal another untold story where justice, identity, and courage collide at 30,000 feet. See you in the skies.